Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're good. This is Chewing It Over, 12:30 weekdays here in your lunch break to chat about all things. And as ever, anyone that, as I mentioned yesterday, I'm making note, who's helps me out, telling me that the sound's working and that the stream's live, etc. We're 30 episodes in, and so I assure you, I will get over this soon. But the more of you that let me know that things are working, the less of rambling like this I do every single show. So please do let me know if you can hear me loud and clear. Unfortunately, if you to click buttons and likes or whatever it might be, wherever you're listening to this, I don't get that on here on the dashboard. A comment, posting an emoji even is how I can find out that you can hear me okay. I need your help today. I'm absolutely torn on this topic. It is, for those of you that didn't know, it's National AHP Day, Allied Health Professional Day. Alistair, thanks a lot. First comment from LinkedIn. He's got me on there. That's great. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm properly torn, and I need your assistance. I need to work out where my opinion lies. Well, I'll share a range of opinions. I will argue now as to about AHP Day, about the title of AHP. Allied Health Professionals is what it stands for those that don't know. And I'm much like, a couple of weeks ago, I think we were sort of saying about what it was World Physiotherapy Day, World PT Day, and what the utility of these days are is one thing. But there's two things. There's whether or not National AHP Day is something that we should be celebrating and championing. But there's also then the relevance of the title AHP, Allied Health Professionals. And the reason I say I need you is because I'm torn. I'm torn as to its utility, both as a day and as a title. I think that it could be something that is of use in certain contexts, and I can understand its history and the reason for it existing. But I also find that it can be a term that can be unhelpful and misleading, and in some instances can really cut against forces for good. And so I end up in this really funny spot. And one of the reasons I'm in a funny spot is because what do I know? I really, I'm in a situation where I'm always seeking to expert opinion, and in this instance, where would an expert be in this particular thing? It can be just a matter of taste. However, in this instance, I see people across social media that I love, that I like their thoughts on, that I know are thoughtful about these things, sometimes being sort of frustrated or skeptical about the term or the day, and then others that I similarly admire that are suggesting that they are particularly proud to be an AHP and that's central to their identity. I see people that are suggesting that a day like this is when they feel especially extra proud and that they want to celebrate that, and that it should be something that's upon all of us to celebrate being AHPs on a day like today. And so I end up in this really funny spot whereby people that I admire, people that I like the thoughts of and really want to share, often sharing their views, I end up in a really funny spot whereby they sort of split. So I'm definitely interested in your thoughts. If you can post those in the comments, I'd love to get a discussion going around this. Doesn't have to be live, but after the fact, please give your feedback as to whether or not this is of utility. Now, to some argue, regardless of where I end up on this, it doesn't necessarily matter, who sees these things. It sort of ends up being a bit of a circle jerk internally within AHP circles, or particularly amongst policymakers. That seems to be when it's popular. But I think it is something that is useful. I think professional identities matter. I think that the range of how people are grouped matters. People sometimes split things down too far and start talking about sort of specialists in particular body parts and kind of being too insular. And then you've got this sort of broader term of being sort of any healthcare professional, never mind allied health professional. Just healthcare professionals might be too vague for some, or just a public sector worker sometimes is used. Obviously, AHPs I found as being really particularly interesting because a lot of the driving force behind the use of that term is what is then categorised under NHS England, and the NHS health quangos, what they're called now, arm's length bodies they're called now. That's a category that's especially relevant, and what qualifies or isn't qualified for being an AHP is dictated by them. So does that mean that some people that, like myself at the moment, although an NHS career until recently, someone that works in the private sector, am I an allied health professional? Arguably, yes. I think I sign a register under the Healthcare Professions Council as a what would be an AHP title. However, is it something that necessarily is as applicable when all the driving forces around it are from the health quango. So I don't know, but I've just wanted to. One of the things that people bring up is that what qualifies and what doesn't qualify. I found this really pretty graphic. I think it was shared by Dave Rennie, who's the lead physiotherapist at Leicester City Football Club. Someone again who I admire, and he was sort of celebrating AHP Day or what have you. And another example of how I'm sort of torn on this. You know, someone who I really like and admire. But yeah, I think this is an interesting one because some there that are unsurprising: physiotherapist, occupational therapist, podiatrist. So in an MSK context, you're looking at the top there. ODPs probably less so MSK, but osteopath. And then you've got things like drama therapist, music therapist, art therapist, and you've not got sports therapist. And also why. You know, I understand a bit about these titles, mainly through my wife being in pediatrics. You know, these are titles that are more prevalent there than they would be close to MSK. Drama therapist, music therapist, art therapist. Why would they all be distinct terms and distinct therapists under AHPs? Because they happen to do degrees under that. Really, why are drama and music not under arts? And the distinctions there, are they super relevant? Now, I'm not saying that they can't exist. I'm just meaning that in this context, you know, how important is that? And, you know, what the omissions seem relevant, you know, when you think about it as being drama therapist, music therapist, art therapist, but not sports therapist. Seems interesting to me. So these are the ones that qualify as allied health professionals. And in this instance, one of the things that makes me wonder and why I'm so torn on this is because there's certain things that it's relevant for, and I think on a political level, it's why it exists. But then there's certain areas where I just think it can be really frustrating. It can really frustrate progress. So let me give two key examples as to what my beliefs are on this, and definitely I'm interested in your thoughts as we go. But my first thing is that it kind of came about, as far as I'm aware, it basically means non-medics, non-nurses. And on a political level, I can understand a frustration that still exists, but certainly historically, for doctors and nurses are more doctors, more nurses is like a political talking point. And so you've got people that are wanting to then try and club together different professions in order to have a better sway, a better clout, and therefore be represented and even considered within numbers, within funding, that sort of thing. And so, and I totally understand why that might be useful. Now, unfortunately, as a title, it's fascinating because it's like, well, why would we not be allied to doctors and nurses, right? It's just it's sort of a separatist thing, and why are all healthcare professionals not allied healthcare professionals? You know, it's sort of offering that distinction and excluding sometimes folk that we've got sometimes more in common with. And so I can't help but think that in MSK, I've got a lot more in common with a sports and exercise medic, an MSK doctor, especially a GP with special interest, for example, than I do with a community nutritionist, dietitian. Nutritionist probably not on that circle. I didn't check, but dietitian, that's what I was meaning. Or a speech and language therapist specializing in swallow. In a pediatric context, you know, I've got some good friends of mine in that space, but there's a lot less overlap between our work than there would be with non-allied health professionals or nurses in ED, for example. You know, so it's kind of in this situation whereby, you know, how relevant is that in how much true camaraderie, how much identity do we have in common there relative to those that aren't in the title? And so then, you know, as I said, the central argument is that it's a political thing. It's not a problem. And if you think about it, and this is what's fascinating, because there's people like Michelle Angus, Dave Rennie, Jane Cowley, who else? A few others that have posted today in celebration of AHP Day that are clinicians who I know and admire. Angie Logan, for example, you know, people I really like and follow on Twitter, celebrating this. And they got me to thinking that there may be something there that I'm missing. But outside of some of those names that predominantly I consider clinical voices, the majority of it comes from those that are managers of AHP. They're in policy. They're sort of in this situation whereby being AHP, you then broaden your remit and broaden your influence, etc. Good friend of mine, Rachel Moses, AHP leader, she's now got as a title on Twitter and does a podcast in that space. And you can so understand it broadens the remit. And some of the leadership principles that she exudes, of course, are applicable across beyond her specialty of being a physiotherapist in respiratory. And so I can so understand it on that policy level. People speak like broadly, but it's something that the reason why I sometimes feel concerned for the title of AHP and therefore the celebration of AHP Day is that depending on who your leaders are within your AHPs, is that it's something that is, in my opinion, beyond most of them to really keep an eye and understand as to what each discipline does within that. You think about the subcategorizing, let's just use physiotherapy for an example, or even within osteopathy as being the MSK professions, is that the disciplines within physiotherapy, it's, that's a tough ask for anyone that's at the height of physiotherapy management, let's say, even within the NHS or elsewhere, to understand the differences between MSK, neuro, where the overlaps and distinctions, respiratory, community care. Community could be any of those things. Where does orthopedics start and where does MSK end? How does rehab join those dots, as we often argue on this show? But then where are the separations? And that's just within physiotherapy, and I've definitely not been exhaustive there because you've got pediatrics, and then within pediatrics you've got MSK, neuro, orthopedics, of course, all of the above, just with children. And it's something that's complex, and I'm not then suggesting, but if you think about that times by whatever it is, 14, and you then think about someone that is then, as far as I can tell, and this is what, maybe there's just this, I always thought there's plenty of folks smarter than me, and therefore it's just that maybe someone that's in charge of AHPs at whatever level, trust level, service level, national level, is going to then understand all of the disciplines that I've just described and the relevance of their day jobs and what that means and what they can offer society, to how that we can optimize their ability to exert good on society. And then they're going to understand all the other things. They're going to understand the 10 different flavors of speech and language therapists. And they're going to understand exactly the difference between a podiatrist and a prosthetist and stuff like that, right? And that, that's it. This is folks smarter than me. Unfortunately, my understanding and dalliance with interacting with policymakers means that I don't encounter any of them, even those that have come from a OT and physiotherapy background, that really comprehend an MSK day job or what the skill set is, or what we deal with regards to understanding the complexities of integrating the evidence base into the day job and how that's changed over the last 10 years. And I'm not surprised. Why would they? Why would they? It's like, what an incredible task. You've got the actual mechanics of leadership in that space and actually having to do the doing. But then how could you keep your finger so close to the pulse in understanding exactly what the U's and R's are in MSK practice when you've also got a community pediatric dietitian that you need to understand what their day job is and how they can best exert influence on society, which can be often of a major importance, of course. So that's one of the challenges I think about it, is that you end up with this massive lump thing, which very few people, from what I can gather, really truly identify as. They might identify at the top level with their professional identity. It's something I sometimes struggle with personally, is how much am I bothered about being a physiotherapist? I often say, generally speaking, I identify as an MSK therapist, I suppose. But equally, I can so understand that as a physiotherapist and the shared training that I had, my wife being a pediatric physio, and she works with really poorly children, and I work with quite well adults, and yet there's still a common thread that's underneath what we do, which I often describe as being rehabilitation. So you can understand that, but you don't see me. I really struggle to then extend beyond that, unless I'm just sort of, as a healthcare professional, is part of my identity, I suppose, yeah, or someone who is trying to help by sort of care, is something that is relevant and a distinction between me and an accountant or a surveyor, or I get that there's a relevant distinction there, but it's this in between identity that's fascinating there, because an AHP is not a doctor and a nurse and stuff, of which would have been lumped into the healthcare professional, and so I don't know. I just find that to be a really interesting middle ground that I just find uncomfortable. So do I need to, is it that if I just understood the politics of it more, that I would suddenly be in favor of it because it's so politically pertinent? I think I'd probably need to see some results from it. I think that one of the things that's been frustrating is that AHP, because it's younger as a title, as a category, and all the levels of leadership that exist in the system, that means that, and the pandemic highlighted this, is that you've just got so much more infrastructure and therefore ability to move quicker, not always better, but quicker, when it needs to react, means that we would sometimes be better off tagging along with doctors and nurses than trying to do our own thing. And I heard from many many a leader and clinician of various different stripes that were then frustrated, particularly in and around springtime, early spring, when we were scrambling for the pandemic. It's just that AHP infrastructure is so underdeveloped and even fraught with the challenges of distributed identities, as I described it, that they weren't able to act particularly quickly. And it would have been better off, and many services locally just tagged along to nursing and doctor provisions, etc., because they were able to do that. And so when you've got things like that going on, where there's actually a detrimental effect for being separate and just being known under a title of not doctor or nurse, which is kind of a process of exclusion in many ways, then that's something that makes me then feel like I need to be persuaded. I need something more powerful than just something to wave a flag around, to be particularly bothered about the title. Now, then it comes to whether or not a day is a useful thing. I've noticed a few patient advocates that I like. Louise Truern, for example, is mentioning that she'd never heard of the title AHP, and now she has, and therefore she's understanding the links between different disciplines. So there may be something to be said for an AHP day, celebrating these things, and people then pulling up this wheel and starting to understand what constitutes an AHP and not. I think it'll beg questions that I was mentioning before about how people will wonder, well, why is that in there and that not? The art, drama, and music therapist, but not sports therapist is the classic example, or sports rehabber. Why are osteopaths in there and not chiros? There are answers to these questions, by the way, certain thresholds in which people meet, and what gets regulated under what. These AHPs, some of them AHP are HCPC registered professionals and others not, and so it's just a fascinating way in which these distinctions play out. But again, I think it's politics, and therefore it's not politics and me saying, oh, it's just bad because it's politics. It might be a smart and politically pertinent thing to do, but I'm just in a situation where I still need persuading. So let me, please do post your comments if you can offer something persuasive, or give me your opinion. I really am interested. I really could do with your help in thinking about whether or not it's a term that means something to you, and if so, please do make the case for why I need to probably wave that flag and celebrate it, and celebrate the title and celebrate the day. But also, if you're someone who's sort of skeptical that this is of any utility, then also please do let me know. It'd be really useful for us to understand that and keep the conversation going, because I do find it to be fascinating. Now, professional identity is something that has been well studied. We've got some decent work that's been done there, decent thinking, decent philosophy, decent sociology. For example, there's some really good work that's provoked, I think, by the first contact practitioner type movement. And I definitely would be interested in sharing some of that with you over the course of the coming weeks, which, for example, Rob Goodwin's PhD, who's an ex-colleague of mine from Nottingham, he did his PhD in first contact. And in that, he's sort of a realist review, so some decent sociological analyses within that tease out the professional identity issues that relate to that, with regards to what it means to be a physiotherapist, a pharmacist, a doctor, whether or not there's protectionism that can occur in those instances, whereby it can be a help or a hindrance. The professional identity, how fluid are they? How threatened do people get when they're encroached on by what he perceives as being their professional turf by other professions or other professionals, or how that can happen internally within different disciplines and sects within it. It's really fascinating stuff, and it's not the only way. It's just an example of what I've come across it more recently, but there's definitely lots of work in the nursing literature around advanced practice, emergency department practitioners and stuff like that was really valuable. So there's definitely stuff around professional identity that gets talked about. And then, but I just would love for that to go further. I mean, I don't know if it's priority research, if I'm honest, but if someone was to sort of be doing that work, I'd love to know how many people identify strongly. I don't just mean know themselves to be an AHP, but it's more that who identifies strongly enough for it to be of some major relevance, and that's something that they'd like to discuss and understand more. So yeah, please do let me know as to what your thoughts are on this topic. As I say, so fraught with, not just because of my own internal conflicts as to whether or not I think it's important or not, but also just I'd be fascinated to know as to whether or not it's something that is of utility. It's not just about what I feel. It's like that there might be some real practical reason that it's something that I just never get my head around whether it's useful or important. It's more to do with the practical utility of it, and that might be persuasive enough. It might be that, well, it doesn't need to have utility or something tangible that it's made a difference to, but it's something that's just comradely. It's something that's good for us to just sort of band together, because sometimes we're otherwise isolated. One of the things that I got as feedback, which was fascinating, was that a prosthetist and an art therapist got in touch with me to make a case for the fact that on the plus side, and they both sort of said similar sorts of things, which was that on the plus, you've got the fact that of otherwise sense of national representation under when they are appropriately lumped with professions such as physiotherapy, occupational therapy, etc. But then they also said that the downside is that hasn't necessarily led to them and their role being understood any further. Sometimes they then get lost. At least they had this individual identity that was niche, that was difficult to get cut through. But it's not as if then being represented more broadly, it sort of seems to have watered down their identity somewhat, especially in those smaller professions. And so there was like a pro and con came through that example, which I found fascinating, and I can so understand it. And there is I come at this as someone who qualified as a physiotherapist that's then specialised in MSK, as I've mentioned before, someone that identifies much more closely with a sort of doctor that does a similar job to me than would do a paediatric community dietitian, speech and language therapist specialising on swallow. There's plenty of commonalities I could find with those people as healthcare professionals, but the allied piece does exclude doctors and nurses, and that's something that is relevant. So yeah, I'm definitely fascinated in all the oohs and ahs that kind of come from that. Now I've got some there's some comments coming in here, and thank you, Joe Turner, guest on the show last Friday. Do tune into that; it was fantastic. Joe said she's a bit at the end of a limb on this, but on a personal level, I find any title constructing. However, I appreciate other people need to know what my base skill set is. I wonder what she meant by constructing. Constricting is what she's then clarified. And so, yeah, I think that's really interesting. And thanks, Joe, for that. Labels, titles, some people more comfortable with it than others. Some people identify with a label, and then the category parameters of that label. And that doesn't need to be just professional identity, right? If people say, what are your politics? Do you identify by a philosophy, a party, an idea, something that you're passionate about, where it's something that's an issue. People say my politics are very green would be an example of that, something that I've used before, in that it wouldn't necessarily be party political. But then similarly, if you could be restricted or constricted by a title such as that. And that's something that's really interesting. Kath Piper has said that although I know I am an AHP, I feel a healthcare professional, a HCP rather than AHP. Kath, I couldn't agree with you more. That's how I feel. If you go that step beyond physio, like I can comprehend the relevance of me being a physiotherapist by qualification, by what I sign my name against the Health Professions Register against, right? Physiotherapist. I've said before about that being fraught with challenges in the sense that I don't think that that's a especially relevant identity relative to being in MSK. I think it's more specifically relevant that. However, if I go one step beyond physiotherapist, I can't help but just be a healthcare professional. I think that that's something that the identity that I can have with anyone that else works in healthcare, from nurses to support workers in care homes and stuff like that. It just seems that I can get that level, and I can even get that level politically. But yeah, allied health professional, I just find it to be interested, for sure. And as Kath said, and a few people said this on Twitter, allied to what? What on earth is allied? Well, I think what as soon as they use the term allied and then they exclude people like doctors, it's like, why are they not our allies? And then also people on Twitter were saying that the only people that they're bothered about being allied to are their patients, and then potentially shoulder to shoulder with any other healthcare professional that's doing their best for patients. But also you'd be allied to your patients, to their carers, to anyone else that's surrounding their care, and the importance of any of them is going to be made relevant. So I think that's what I definitely would want to try and work out is that when we go higher to these bigger umbrellas within allied health professional versus healthcare professional, how much does it matter? That's one thing, we're splitting hairs. But I would say if there's an AHP day and there's a load of hand wringing and no doubt a lot of time, and as soon as this time from, I always say, as soon as you see people that are paid a good salary, spending a lot of time making noise on it, then it's money, right? So National AHP Day costs the taxpayer a certain amount of thousands of pounds, right? It just does. And so is it of utility? That's the sort of thing worth thinking about, right? It's not people volunteering in their spare time, spending a little bit of time almost as a bit of a charity endeavor to think that this is something worth attaching. It's something that exists, and as soon as it exists and as soon as it is spending someone of any significant salary within the public sector is then spending time doing it. Now, I'm not talking about your actual clinicians that are doing that. I mean people that are under that guise that make that and create it, right? So is it worthwhile? Is it a useful use of taxpayer money? Is it useful use of time? Never mind the money. It's like, you've got some of the smartest minds in the world that are then using that as an opportunity to hand wave about AHP Day. I find that to be difficult, and as you can see, I'm just super skeptical. However, as I said at the start, some of the best and brightest, some of the people I really respect their opinion on, they were championing it this morning and feeling like they were. I am a proud AHP, and today especially it makes me proud to be an AHP. Fair play. Like, I'm definitely interested, and I'd be love to no doubt tease some of those points out as well. So if any of you feel that way, then please do post in your comments. But also you can join me on the show anytime, and we can sort of get into this. I've got some good friends in that space, and I'm going to try and reach out to them and understand what it means to do it. I mean, I think I've had people like Naomi McVeigh, who is an AHP lead within the Health Quangos. I forget her exact title now, but just someone who I really admire and I've got a great relationship with over the years and have a lot in common with. But me and her have had that chat before. I remember at a Big R's event where we were discussing about the fact that it's like how important, and she was always making the case on a practical level. She was saying it's politically pertinent for us to have representation so that the politicians can't just keep talking about amounts of doctors and nurses and not creating that AHP infrastructure. And she made that case on a practical level, and it was interesting. It was somewhat persuasive, but it never really carried on an identity level as to why that can't then be why it's something that is because you're trying to get people to identify as AHPs is a different thing. The practical politics of it's one thing, but realistically, how much do we need to then use the leverage of then trying to get everyone to sort of club together? That's the thing that I find most interesting. So lots to think about. Thank you so much for joining me on this sort of admittedly just blurting it out, me chewing it over, some of you commenting, but also just me just sort of admitting to a bit of a fraught thing where I've definitely not got a well-worked opinion on, and something that I'm definitely open to change on. So many thanks. See, when I love it when this happens. I've got a comment here from Kath Piper that just says no, and I don't know what she was saying no to. I don't know if she was disagreeing with me or I put out a hypothetical question. Maybe it was when I said, should there be a day for it? Should it matter? And maybe she was saying no, or she might just be saying no to my opinion. I don't know, and it doesn't matter. She can disagree or agree with whatever she likes. Thank you so much. And for those of you that have tuned in all this way, here is a bit of a leak. You've seen this, you might have seen this go out on Twitter. This is the leak of the sessions for Therapy Live Sport. And so, yeah, there's rather exciting 2 rooms of education. Some of these are bound to clash, which is going to be challenging. But yeah, just look at the absolute smorgasbord of goodness that we have at Therapy Live Sport on the 7th of November. I will post a link now in the comments section of wherever you might be finding this across Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, is the link to the final 1,000 tickets to Therapy Live Sport on the 7th of November. We've got 1,000 more tickets available, and then it's sold out, and it's absolute who's who within the swim, bike, run disciplines and triathlon. We've got some top athletes that we're yet to announce that you won't find on that list, but the timetable will be out on Friday, and I imagine be very surprised if we're not sold out by the end of the weekend. So do snap them up if you're coming. It's free of charge, 7th of November, which is a Saturday. So please join us at Therapy Live Sport. And that's a thank you for those that have tolerated my wafflings about AHP Day. But also we will be mentioning that in coming weeks, as well as having the guests on this show to talk a little bit about their sessions at Therapy Live Sport, which is going to be exciting. So many thanks. And all that is left for me to do is blare the sound out for our outro. And I'll see you tomorrow, of which we have a major and intimidating guest on tomorrow. Matthew Scarsbrook's going to be joining me, and he says he wants to get stuck into the philosophy of touch, which intimidates the hell out of me, but I'll do my best to hold my own. But yeah, Matt's going to be joining me tomorrow, and it's going to be absolutely belting. So thanks a lot. Without further ado, I'll see you tomorrow. Goodbye.